the live birdwatching podcast episode will probably go down in history as one of the most long-winded in-jokes ever and the most hastily organised event of all time. I mean, it was a very special day out there hunting for Peter Pigeon. But before we get into the hunt, let's not forget the journey of how we got here, how this came to be. It all started in Chapter 9, when I spotted my very first fat bird. Yesterday, I saw the fattest bird I've ever seen in my entire life. I stared it directly in the eye and then just lost my shit laughing at the bird. Like, I don't know how birds get that fat. And you know what's funny about it? This is not interesting to anyone, a fat bird story, but oh, how wrong I was. But in the weeks to come, more fat bird stories kept coming. So the other day at work, I didn't see the fat bird again, but I'm like 40% sure I saw a drunk bird. It hit a tree, and then the tree, it ping-ponged like off, and it hit a wall, and then it just kind of flew off. I told my girlfriend as well, and she was like, yeah, I think you just saw a clumsy bird. So that's another bird story. Man, if I have a new bird story every 3 weeks, now I'm just going to be one of those freaky bird watchers sitting outside with binoculars trying to get more content for the podcast. Little did I know I was foreshadowing the biggest event in podcast history. I noticed how arrogant birds are getting. Birds can't be affording to be cocky these days, or arrogant. We all know from this podcast alone that they're getting fat and clumsy. People think I'm some kind of bird enthusiast. All I do is I look at a bird and then judge the girth of its stomach and whether or not I think it's clinically obese or not. And all of a sudden, an underground fat bird community was formed. Also, please keep the bird stories coming. They're the kind of content we all need right now. Love from Sweden. People love the bird stories. My podcast audience is 50% people who are interested in my comedy, 50% fat bird enthusiasts. Every single person who I've ever met who listens to the podcast goes, bro, have you seen another fat bird? Man, I saw a fat bird. Over the coming weeks, fat bird sightings lowered, and thus the tales of these girthy fowls began to cease on the podcast, much to the listeners' disappointment. Riley, hey mate, you should definitely bring back the bird stories on your podcast. Jennifer, hey Luke, love your stuff. Any more fat bird stories this week? Haha, can't wait to hear another one soon. How often do you think I just see fat birds? I was on a real animal sighting hot streak, and now it's just completely gone cold. I'm pretty sure fat birds are extinct. And just like that, it seemed to be over. We assumed that all fat birds had succumbed to one of Jenny Craig's affordable and nutritious meal plans and no longer walked amongst us. Unsponsored. Weeks went by, and with no reported fat bird sightings in this time of darkness, we needed a hero. And that hero came to us through Dylan. Okay, here's a good bit of correspondence I had, and it is fat bird related, so get excited. Dylan said, all he just said was, found a Facebook profile of a fat bird. And then he linked me this Facebook profile called Peter Pigeon. And I can I can only describe it to you as the best Facebook profile I've ever seen. And the fat bird community rose up out of their nests as a new fowl had been brought to our attention. And thus we began learning more about the infamous Peter Pigeon. Like, here's a good status. Hi, I'm Peter, and I'm a pigeon. I'm going to fly to Maui with the boys. Because he looks quite fat from the picture, but not kind of like diabetes fat, just like post-pregnancy fat. It says the pigeon is from Melbourne. Oh wait, it says, I'm a pigeon and I live by the Yarra. Our goal became pretty clear. One mission and one mission only. To get Peter Pigeon on the podcast. One day, we could be blessed with an interview of Peter Pigeon himself. I mean, as far as A-list celebrities go, you've got your Brads, you've got your Angelinas, you've got your Jennifer Anistons, and then Peter Pigeon's not too far above them. I contacted Peter through his official account and said, hey Peter, big fan. Anyone who isn't can get flocked. I'm keen to get yourself on my podcast. After a couple of weeks of trying, it became very apparent that perhaps we were approaching Peter with far too much enthusiasm. I noticed that lots of you guys have been adding Peter Pigeon on Facebook, I think we're all coming on too strong. And I think we've scared Peter off. See, here's my plan for getting Peter on the podcast. This week, we're just going to freeze Peter Pigeon out. And the freeze out began. I can still remember the sleepless nights, the eternal struggle to resist complimenting his plump underwing, but it was having no effect. I'm no closer to getting Peter on the podcast. But then I devised a plan. One last attempt to get Peter Pigeon on the podcast. Instead of trying to get Peter to come to us, we come to Peter. But we know one thing. He lives at the Yarra River in Melbourne. If I'm gonna enter in a full-fledged and fully committed Peter hunt, I don't want to do it alone. We need multiple people on this hunt. And I would love to do a live bird watching episode of the podcast. What a glorious day. What a triumphant day that would be. But this is really the last resort, and the only thing I can think of is coming to his home, knocking on his door and saying, "Why the flock did you ignore my message?" In order to give ourselves the best chance of finding Peter, I began to assemble an elite birdwatching task force. 8 brave members of the Fatbird community to combine their talents and form what is now known as the Elite 8.
This is Lewis Spears speaking. Can I ask who's calling?
Hello, is this Danielle?
Who's this?
It is codename White Dove calling from the EBWTF, the Elite Birdwatching Task Force. How are you going today?
Oh my god, I'm good. How are you?
Hello? 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 It is.
Hello, Caitlin speaking.
And thus the Elite 8 was assembled. Lewis Spears, aka Birdseye, the Watchtower. Caitlin, aka Chick Jagger, Beastmaster and Bird Stylist. Brandon, codename Chipper Reed, the Lurer. Brody, aka the Turd Tracker. Danielle, codename Quacky Chan, the Translator. Dean, aka Professor Flapsalot, the Bird Expert. Taylor, also known as Patricia Pigeon, our decoy. And finally, myself, White Dove, King Dickhead and Commander-in-Chief. There was only one thing left to do for our Elite 8 to take the sacred birdwatching oath.
I, Chick Jagger, solemnly swear
To focus my passion and lust for fat-flighted fowls,
I shall use all my bird watching elements.
earth, wind, fire, binocular, and thy hot chips.
Earth, wind, fire, binoculars, and thy hot chip.
Cuckoo!
Cuckoo! Cuckoo! Cuckoo! Cuckoo!
Amen. Just a few days out from our hunt for Peter Pigeon, I received some very important intel. The map of Peter Pigeon's last known location. That he actually sent a hand-drawn map. His suspected path is a red dotted line. Robert has also included a little skull that says the death of Ronald. And Ronald was a water rat, also seen on the same night as Peter. I'm assuming Ronald the water rat and Peter Pigeon were friends. And that was it, the last clue before we now attempt to find Peter Pigeon. This could be a world first. I don't think any podcast or even any radio station has ever gotten an interview with a pigeon before. So strap in for the first ever live episode of Memoirs of a White Guy, straight from Peter's nesting grounds, the Yarra River in Melbourne, Australia. And in the misquoted words of Liam Neeson, we will find you and we will interview you.